Good to be with you. It's been a long time. I was thinking about that recently, that I came to Bloomington for the first time. I moved to Bloomington about 16 years ago, and started coming to join you for occasional sermons now and again, going that far back. And I remember when the service was in that room. Some of you may remember that way back when, and so it's almost, 16 years or so. So it's wonderful to kind of continue to build this connection with you over the years. Some of you actually maybe remember this and are familiar with this from some years ago, where I was involved in a local protest in Bloomington, and there's a campaign against there was a farm stand in our local farmers market in Bloomington, and that farm stand was run by a white supremacist. So there was lots of concern about that. It was the only business in Bloomington known to be run by a white supremacist, so it was pretty distinct in that. And I and many others were very concerned that it was in our town, and that a person with those lived values was attempting to sell in our market. Now a protest movement began around this that started with an awareness campaign and calls for boycotts, just trying to let people know what was going on at the stand. And the protests, later moved into direct protest of the stand itself. And the protests became significant enough that they drew a group of conservative activists as a counter-reaction, followed by another counter-reaction of Antifa activists wearing black and dressed, and wearing masks and dressed in black. For safety reasons, this all kind of escalated due to threats from some white supremacist gangs in the state. The market was actually closed for 2 weeks. It was actually kind of a beautiful thing because people rallied around the market and helped it start in a private location for those 2 weeks. But it was a lot of change and a lot of turmoil. And as you can imagine, all of this going on created some controversy. The market was run by the city, so they didn't believe they had the legal right to remove a vendor for white supremacist beliefs. The farmers were upset because they were afraid they were losing business because of all of the controversy around the issue. And many activists and community members were upset because a farm stand run by white supremacists continued to operate in our community, and there didn't seem to be any mechanism to change that. And a relatively simple thing, the statement of disapproval of a business run by a white supremacist, became something much more challenging and difficult and honestly divisive. As someone who sought to bring people together around the issue, I worked with some activists to change up the protest strategy and gear it more towards fun and silliness. And that led to the start wearing purple practice, where people wore purple shirts at the market to express their protest of the stand, something that you all supported during a service when I came to talk about this event way back then, when you wore purple to church that Sunday. And it's truly a memory I will never forget, seeing all of you in purple that day. And we have photos of everybody lined up, all dressed in purple, which was awesome. And thank you so much for all of you who did that. It was wonderful. And it also led us to protesting while wearing costumes, and some of you may remember me actually getting arrested while dressed as a giant purple unicorn. That's something you can Google if you wish. I think it still comes up first when you Google my name. The fund did change the tone of the protests and reduce the counter-protests to zero. Actually, after that shift in the type of protesting, there was no counter-protesting at all, and there's a lot of reasons for that psychologically and others of why silliness does not stir counter-protests where aggression and hostility can. And it also did build up some increased support for the activist cause around the issue, and I think to some degree toned down some of the divisiveness. But throughout this process, there was also a very serious tension amongst the many activists involved in the protest, that the activists themselves had tension within themselves and division within themselves. And there was, that division was over a very consistent battle between two very different forms of activism. One form of activism was geared towards, honestly, anger at everyone who wasn't supportive of the protest. And the other was more seeking ways to bring people together and grow the movement even without perfect ideological alignment. And this was stressful. There was a way in which a person's dedication to the cause was validated by how angry they were and how many people they were frustrated with. And if they weren't experiencing anger and frustration, they were showing they weren't truly dedicated to the cause. A number of activists were very hostile to any disagreement, and this would often show up in social media reactions to people in the community with concerns. And it became very hard to say anything counter to the angriest of protesters for fear of being labeled disloyal. And I found this all particularly challenging, and it peaked when a number of, and I say this with particularity, but a number of white activists involved in the protests got into a very public argument with a prominent local black man over the best way to deal with the concern. And I took a strong public stand on that social media argument, criticizing the activists for going against this man, and their anger was then directed at me. And I was labeled toxic by one of the activists. I did sit down with this man, the African-American man, a few weeks later, as he was a friend of mine, and we talked about how he was doing after the whole incident. He's a very, joyous person. Some of you may know him as brother William from the radio. He's on the local FIU down our public radio station. Does a show called Soul. On Fridays. Yeah. Anyway? It's jazz. Yeah. Lots of music and jazz. And I'm forgetting the name at the moment. I apologize. But he's a great guy, and we began to talk. And he was processing the whole experience and why he was frustrated and expressing his frustration in that public setting. And he said he felt like these white activists were claiming anger and rage that didn't belong to them. And I thought that was a really interesting and powerful kind of insight that people were, again, I think some of this always comes from this feeling like I'm the good person, or feeling virtuous, that sometimes we equate anger with virtue. And I found this description just very apt for the challenges that we were experiencing amongst this activism. And some weeks later, truthfully, more of the same activists began to attack me online, and the whole thing fell apart. And many of those relationships remain fractured today. People I'd worked very closely with for months and months became people now that I don't even speak to. And the whole process of this particular activism, this particular struggle, was very difficult for me, and I also learned a lot. The internal dissension was painful, and also being associated publicly with very certain types of strong anger and even hate-filled activism was never something I felt comfortable with. It was a constant level of stress for me, seeing that dynamic and trying to be a part of it, but also not associated with all the ways it showed up. But I also felt this very strong commitment to carry it through and to stay involved in the protests and the activism. I didn't want to be another, if you'll excuse this way of saying it, but I didn't want to be another white person that bailed on anti-racist protest when things got uncomfortable. But I also came away with a clarity from these protests that that will direct my future activism and does direct my future activism, and that's that I won't be involved again in activism that isn't deeply grounded, not in anger, but in love. An activism that allows for the possibility of transformation and engages people with care rather than hostility. For me, I don't see any real way forward in social change and political change and cultural change without love as the foundation. Author Bell Hooks, which we heard in the opening words, is a marvelous thinker. She's passed away now, but she's still just a marvelous writer, and her very provocative in her thoughts and what she offers. She wrote a quote that is one of my favorites. It's one that I hang on to on a regular basis. It really holds me and grounds me and reminds me of what's important, and it really helps me focus on where to direct my efforts. And she wrote this in her book, All About Love. And she said, "The transformative power of love is the foundation for all meaningful social change." The transformative power of love is the foundation for all meaningful social change. The transformative power of love is the foundation for all meaningful social change. This is so powerful because it reminds me of that's the ground for social change, and that is always the ground for meaningful social change, and that other approaches, no matter how perceived as noble, are not what creates meaningful social change. And despite this kind of sense of things that she offers, that the transformative power of love is the foundation for all meaningful social change, Hooks notes that it's interesting that love is so rarely at the heart of our attempts at social change, that so rarely do we embrace that, publicly at least. She wrote, "All the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized a love ethic. Yet many remain reluctant to embrace the idea of love as a transformative force. To them, love is for the naive, the weak, the hopeless romantic." She goes on, "The transformative power of love is not fully embraced in our society because we often wrongly believe that torment and anguish are our natural condition. Whether it is the ongoing worldwide presence of violence expressed by the persistence of man-made war, hunger and starvation, the day-to-day reality of violence, the presence of life-threatening diseases that cause the unexpected deaths of friends, comrades, and loved ones, there is much that brings everyone to the brink of despair." Hooks speaks to something she calls the worship of death. She says this worship of death is characterized by a constant resort to violence and the insistence that the natural order of things is for the strong to prey on the weak. She goes on, "In progressive political circles, to speak of love is to guarantee that one will be dismissed or considered naive. But outside those circles, there are many people who openly acknowledge that they are consumed by feelings of self-hatred, who feel worthless, who want a way out. Often they are too trapped by paralyzing despair to be able to engage effectively in any movement for social change. However, if the leaders of such movements refuse to address the anguish and pain of their lives, they will never be motivated to consider personal and political recovery. Any political movement that can effectively address these needs of the spirit in the context of liberation struggle will succeed. As Hooks offers us love as a transformative force, I think she says some things about love that really caught my attention in her understanding of what love is. There's things that she brings to bear in our thoughts about what love is and what in some cases what it isn't that I find particularly meaningful. One of the things she says is that love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose love. Love is not a fleeting feeling, not a romantic distraction, but a deliberate, ethical commitment. And I like that very much, that love is something we choose. It's an ethic we decide to bring forth in the world. You know, I've been noticing more and more the truism in Jesus is by their fruits you shall know them. There are many who express positive intentions or goals or feelings but do harm anyway, and I think for a good part of my life I paid more attention to the intentions and feelings than the results, and as I've gotten older I've become more attuned to what people actually do as a way of discerning how much to trust them and how to engage them. Hooks also says, dreaming that love will save us, and I like this one too. She says, dreaming that love will save us, solve all our problems, or provide a steady state of bliss or security only keeps us stuck in wishful fantasy, undermining the real power of love, which is to transform us. I appreciate this comment and its subtlety. Its strength might not be immediately obvious, but she's saying that love is not a cure-all. It's not something that fixes the world and makes it all better. Love is not an exterior force that will come in and save the day. Love is not a superhero. Love is that which transforms. And who does it transform? You and me. It's not just there to fix the other guy. Love transforms us, me, you. And lastly, she actually offers a definition of love through the work of Erich Fromm, a definition that may not be fully what we need to get to with this word, but so useful in some ways. She says love, and this is taking from Erich Fromm's work, love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. I think about those protests from years ago, and I wonder how we as activists, I as an activist, would have responded if our core motivation had been the nurturing of each other's spiritual growth. What would we have been? What would that activism look like? What if we saw that as the goal for the white supremacist farmer, and for all the farmers for that matter, and for the city officials, and for the more moderate people in our town who preferred quiet over justice, and our fellow activists? I wonder how things would have been different. I wonder how we might have approached that whole situation if love had been our ethic and our goal. So I ask all of us, what can you do? And I had an old seminary professor, and he loved to say, we're not interested in perfection, we're interested in improving the odds. So I ask you, what can you do to improve the odds that you choose love more in your life? If love is an ethic and love is a choice, what can you do to improve the odds that you choose love more in your life? What can you do to bring love into every aspect of your life? Your families, your work, your faith community, your politics. How can you nourish the spiritual growth of those around you? Can you be a person that nourishes the spiritual growth of those around you? How can you nurture your own? And if in fact, if Hooks is right, and love is the foundation of all meaningful social change, how do we make it more so? To this may we be dedicated. Shalom, amen, and blessed be.